Hello, my name is Robin Miller, Deputy Superintendent for School Support and Accountability at the State Department of Education. When a crisis occurs, communication is key to keeping people safe. Without knowing who to contact or what to say, the lines of communication can break down very quickly. What may start as important information can get turned into a wildly inaccurate rumor, or it can get lost altogether. While everyone tries to figure out what's happening, the crisis could still be ongoing, and lives could be at stake. In order to keep people safe, good communication needs to be practiced before, during, and after a crisis. Make sure everyone knows who to contact in the event of an emergency, including administrators, staff, teachers, students, and parents. Everyone should have a role to perform during a crisis. They should know what information to be communicated, when it needs to be shared, and how it should be disseminated. Create a culture of awareness and take time to discuss safety procedures and talk about if they need to be updated. Keep first responders up to date on information, like building layouts and safety plans. Listen to what students tell you about what goes on in the hallways. Stay current on what social media apps are best for staying in contact. After all, communication is ever-changing. Our emergency preparations need to stay up to date with current technology. The Rave Panic Button app is provided to schools in case of a major crisis. Be sure you know how and when to use it. Don't assume communication will just happen when a crisis occurs. Be proactive and plan your communication strategies ahead of time. Knowing what your role is and how to communicate is vital to solving a crisis. For more information, contact the Office of School Safety and Security by either phone or email, or visit our page at the Oklahoma State Department of Education website. Hello.
Excuse me, hello. I'd like to welcome you to the Office of School Safety and Security webinar, monthly webinar. This is Communications in Schools, and my name is Cindy Swearingen. I am the Assistant Executive Director for the Office of School Safety and Security. Jason, if you'll turn the slide to the team. We have a great team that we work with. We have our Executive Director, Mr. John Parker, Michelann Ooten, who is in charge of this month's webinar, and you'll be hearing from her in just shortly. We have Steve Lynch and Jason Gray, who are also school safety specialists, and Jason is the one that we have behind the scenes running our technology, so we're very appreciative of him. And then the great Lindsay Moore, who we just couldn't survive without Lindsay. She's kind of the glue that holds us all together. So our team, as I said, works at the Office of School Safety and Security, and we're very excited. This month is communication. And to lead you off in the communication webinar, we do have Michelann Ooten, who serves as a school safety and security specialist, but she has a vast knowledge of communication, public information officer. I believe over 30 years, started out as a reporter, and then moved into public information officer with the Office of Emergency Manager on through as the Executive Director of Oklahoma Emergency Management. And now we're very blessed to have her come to our office and bring her expertise with us. So with that, Michelann, I will turn this webinar over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. And Jason, if you want to move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being on today's webinar. And thank you, speakers, for being a part of today's training event. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. We've got the chat opened up. We'll hope everyone will start posting their questions as the webinar moves forward. We will address all the questions in the chat, or attempt to certainly, after our guest speakers have made their presentations. And speaking of that, our webinar speakers today are Lynn Cordes. She's the Executive Director of Communications for Lawton Public Schools. We also have Alesha Leemaster, Executive Director of Communications and Community Relations for Norman Public Schools. I'll give a more lengthy introduction for both of them before each one of them speak, but I want to take the opportunity to kind of lay some foundation, if you will, and help everyone to know kind of where this webinar came from, if you will. We are focused on a dedication to the daily or regular communications and how those efforts pay off when it comes to certainly school districts as well as other organizations. It can pay off on a small incident. It can certainly pay off when it comes to a large disaster or a large or very large crisis. So when it comes to preparing yourself to be in the best place possible to deal with an incident, to deal with an event, I always come back to planning. And when it comes to talking about communications in schools, it's a communications plan. And certainly what we encourage everyone to do is certainly work with their local emergency managers. I'm sure that's a surprise for me to be mentioning that from my experience with Oklahoma's emergency managers as well as the nation's emergency managers. The plan is very important. It's a great document if you put it together well, but it does no good if it just lies in a binder and goes up on a shelf. So it's about the planning process. It's about developing an emergency operations plan for your district and making sure that there's a communications annex or a communications chapter within there. It's about making sure you have a crisis communications plan. And again, it's about having everyone come together who are going to be the players when it comes to an incident that occurs and making sure that you walk through those incidents. Do an exercise, actually exercise your plan, making sure everyone knows their role. How are we going to release information? Who's going to do that? What's the process to do that? Hopefully, as you're working through this planning process, your folks, all of your participants are going to have the same questions and be throwing out the same ideas that you hear me throwing out today. Working with stakeholders, this of course is essential. And I know our guest speakers today do this on a daily basis, and we'll share with you some situations where this has certainly helped them out. But when it comes to our stakeholders, of course, we have a vast list, a vast difference among them. We have diversity among them, so on and so forth. But the most important thing there is to meet our stakeholders where they're at. For example, we know our students, we know our parents, we know different groups certainly work through and are informed by social media. The social media today is going to be different than social media is tomorrow. We all know there are so many platforms that everyone works through, and what's popular today isn't going to necessarily be popular next month. We have to constantly be working with that, identifying where are folks getting their information. How can we help them to get the accurate information and timely information, and to help them to recognize that the authority, the official information is going to come from this district? Well, that happens with practice. So we're back to that daily work of communicating. And when you talk about social media and stakeholders who get informed that way, let's not forget about our stakeholders that are of the more mature age, who also depend on mainstream media. Let's not forget our folks there in mainstream media. And then finally, district size. I threw that in because this applies to whether you're a large district, a media district, or small district, certainly. And I understand a different amount of resources may be available depending on the size of a school district. But I would encourage you to recognize that no matter what the size of your district, the need for communication is always there. And it's managed best whenever we are doing it on a daily or regular basis. So if you don't have the resources, if it hasn't been decided that there'll be a communications department, for example, who else among your staff could help to manage communication needs? Maybe it's that journalism teacher. It might be again, a communications teacher, a journalism teacher, maybe an English teacher. Anyway, someone willing to wear an extra hat and help make sure that we have success whenever it comes to a crisis, certainly within your district. All right, and with that, now I'm going to turn today's webinar over to our first guest speaker. First up is Lynn Cordes. Lynn is the Executive Director of Communications for Lawton Public Schools. She's been with the district since 2003. Before becoming Communications Director, she was Lawton Public School TVs, video production manager, and also a high school journalism and media and multimedia teacher. As communications director, Lynn does more than coordinate media opportunities. With more than 20 years in the communications field, she strives to bring in new creative content and programs for both students and staff. Lynn also works with local, state, and federal agencies as the district's emergency management representative. Yay! Anyway, Lynn has a BA in communications and a master's degree in mass communications. And with that, welcome, Lynn. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Michelann. I appreciate the time. And I'm excited to be here with you guys, fellow communications directors and emergency managers from across the state. Thank you for your time. So I was asked to present on what it was like for communicating through the COVID pandemic. And I really like to start with this because I'll share some insight of what we did as a district to not prepare for the pandemic, but how it helped carry us. And so one of that was one of my emergency manager friends always likes to tell us, what the eye doesn't see, the mind doesn't know, doesn't exist. So if we aren't brought to that and we're not open to seeing what's out there and learning new things, we're not sure how to get there or what we even need to look for. So we will go into the presentation and I'll talk about how some of this has helped us manage our way through the pandemic. Jason, next slide. Communications, especially crisis communications, the first thing is to keep calm and push forward. You are the subject matter expert in your area, and you are the one that is at least trying to prepare your district and your stakeholders for what it will look like for the coming days, hours, and even minutes once a crisis hits. And so that starts with two very important things for us, and that's foundation and relationships. For us in Ooten Public Schools, it was important that we had trust from our leadership and the support from our superintendent that what we were doing in the communications department was going to make huge positive impacts. And that was showing that we were knowledgeable, that we were consistent in our messaging, that we were we were a reliable source for working with stakeholders. And the one thing I learned during my emergency management training was that we all need to have a common operating picture. We need to be able to speak the same language as our emergency management partners, as well as local school districts and the media. And the only way to do that was to have that daily communications with them that generated different levels. That also goes into the next area of foundation, which is who are you speaking with daily? Who's at your table? Do you need to speak with them weekly, monthly? And as we go into the presentation, I'll bring up Ooten first, because that exercise, like Michelann said, exercising what your plan is changes a lot of what you do during a crisis. That's where you identify the gaps. That's where you fail. And it's okay to fail because it's an exercise and that's where you improve. So the foundation of your daily communication and the different levels that you speak with different people also impacts the messaging that goes out. That in turn goes to your relationships, internal communications. You want your staff to hear it from you first and not from social media or from an outside entity, whether it's your local media or a parent. So what are your plans on showing them that this is where you can get your information first? Build those relationships, doing that daily with sending out things that come out from the superintendent's office to them first, and then getting it to your parents, students, and the community. The other part of that relationship building is the partnerships and collaborations. That goes into the planning part. You need them so that they can be a part and see what it looks like for your district during a crisis, and they're not trying to see where you're at during the event. The other part is preparation, and training was a huge thing for us pre-COVID, and I'll share that in just a minute. But without that training and knowledge base, then when we went into exercising, it would have been lost. So we did a lot of training prior to going into our exercise series of Ooten First. And then the most important part to make sure that our story was told was the external communications and building that relationship and that trust with our families, with our students, and with our stakeholders. We don't want anybody, you don't want anybody to ever tell your story. So you've got to make sure that you do it in the way that the message needs to get across. And I know Alesha will speak on some of that, but it's really important that you are out there and you share your truth to what the crisis is and how it's being managed in your district. Jason, next slide. So in speaking about how we did it, I broke this down into pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID communication. The one thing we had was leadership support. We knew going into, our crisis that we would have that support from the superintendent. He trusted my team, myself, and our leaders to handle certain aspects of the dialogue, the processes, and who would disseminate the information. And then we all had the baseline communication and flow. We also did a lot of monitoring and training, which we were in our Lawton First exercise. And so everything we were doing was also being monitored as things were happening overseas. So we were able to make sure that we had our foundation ready if it were to come over to the States. And it eventually did, which brought us into the COVID pandemic. And for that daily communication, it was important for us to share the expectations, what our parents needed to know, what our staff needed to know, that we were also collecting and processing that data that we were receiving. We also had subject matter experts. That wasn't us, those were the health officials. And we wanted to make sure that our community knew that our decisions weren't done alone. We were making that communication with our health department. And then they also in turn helped us to create messaging as it related to the pandemic. And we determined how we would disseminate that and our channels that we would go through. So that was a part of it. From there, we knew we had to be flexible because things were not just changing weekly or monthly, not even daily, but sometimes by the minute. One thing you would hear, could change the next. And so we had to be flexible with our messaging and still just share the accurate information with our stakeholders, especially our students and parents, where the cessation happened and what it looked like for the school district. And post pandemic, we're almost there. We hope, cross our fingers, by August, everything can be, returned and we look a lot different than we did this year. But we know that it's a continued after action review. We have to follow up with the expectations that we put in place and what we need to change. And then that brings us to continued support. We laid that foundation during the pre-COVID and COVID. And so we know what it looks like, and we want to make sure that we continue to support those areas and flexibility. That's something I don't think any of us will ever go backwards on. We learned a lot with flexibility and adaptability during this pandemic, and that really has carried us through this time right now that some have struggled with. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll share some of our pre-crisis communication. So Michelann did bring up exercise your plan. And for us, this exercise of Lawton First, and that is where we worked with our emergency responders, our local law enforcement. It was to work on an active shooter situation. And we know that's something in school districts that is something you do not want to plan for, but you have to be prepared. And if you don't, then that could turn really ugly really fast. And we've seen a lot of things happening in the media and with, school districts across our nation. And it was important for us that we exercise that and that we worked with our stakeholders and that we worked with law enforcement. So prior to that, we were already in the midst of doing an exercise series. We started with a seminar and we talked about what it looked like and we shared our plans. We were also able to see what their plans were in case any crisis would have happened in their area, and kind of combined our resources so that we could have a really strong community. And we would let our stakeholders know that no one entity in our area, in our county, is alone. We had the, FBI, we had Comanche County Emergency Management, we had the MERC, we had, our Fort Sill partners, we had almost 50 individual organizations a part of our exercise as a school district to have a full scale. And we were able to get through the seminar and we were able to get through, a tabletop exercise where we walked through everything and physically found gaps. I mean, we were able to identify that. And so those district collaborations prior to any crisis is important. So that way, where their strengths are and they know what yours are and you know who to meet with. The daily meetings, we had daily meetings prior to the pandemic truly taking shape with our leaders. And we also invited our educational partners from Cameron University and the Technology Center. And we met with them every single day to share what it would look like. If we were going to do something, how would it look for them? And so that we were all on the same page, not pulling and tugging at our families. And then social media and district notifications, we had already built that system for our families to go to certain areas on our website. If there was something that they needed to find, that's where they could get their answers. And the district notifications, they knew if they weren't receiving information or phone calls or notifications, who to contact and how to get that taken care of immediately. So that helped us pre-pandemic, sharing that information with our families. Next slide, Jason. Now, during the crisis, like many of our school districts out there, we had to look at our services and we had to find that support, but we also needed to give our families a way to communicate back to us. And we did that through surveys. And when we got shut down, we wanted to make sure that they knew if they needed food or if they needed mental health or if they needed somebody to talk to, because they didn't know what to do with their students who were receiving services with us, that we could find a way to provide it safely to them and give them some assistance in ways that, we could without being physically in person because of the shutdown. And that communication only happened because of everything we did prior. And we knew, and we are right now, being very flexible with what we're doing. We started school right on, as intended on the first day, but we provided flexibility for our families that were nervous about coming back into a traditional setting. And through that flexibility, we had the communications from our families saying, what about when we're at work? You want us to, go to work all day and come home and now we have to educate our kids, we're going to be lost. That turned into a night program for our virtual students. So that session, we had night teachers that were dedicated to those students, and they were in work with the student from 3 to 9 p.m. And that was their session. And they gave our families a sigh of relief so that if they had to go to a babysitter, if they had to go to the grandparent who was not technology savvy, that they had us to count on when they got home from work and we could be there for them. And then of course, continued training. And that was done through our health department. We met with them and spoke with them almost every day. There was myself or the superintendent that was calling and trying to confirm, what numbers look like in the data. And so that happened every day and still does. We actually have a really good relationship with them, and we do everything kind of as one at the health department with the school district. So it's been great to have that partnership. Jason, next slide. So thinking outside of the box, our why was that we wanted to make sure that our community knew what was coming out of our district and hear it from us. And how did we want to do that? Was it through messaging, through social media, numerous text messages that they had already done? What we decided, the superintendent and I, you'll see him here, is we thought outside of the box, and we started June 26th, our first podcast, and it was to update our families about the COVID summary. I mean, what is going on in our district? What does it look like? And hear it from him firsthand and make sure that we didn't leave anybody behind by allowing them to submit questions and ask, certain types of information that we could disclose without breaking FERPA. And that was done through our Time with Heim podcast, which we still do now. We are into our 36th episode, and it's been great for our community because they get to hear it from our superintendent. We've kind of gone away from the COVID summary because our numbers have gone down, but I would like to share you the COVID summary. A district our size, I would not consider us a large district, but a medium size. And so Jason, could you do me a favor and hit that COVID summary link? This is what we decided to do. We did not feel we wanted to bombard our families with a daily text message of whether somebody was quarantined or we had a case, because that could become overwhelming. So we created the COVID-19 summary page, which is still in use today. We updated it as often, every time we got a new case, we would do it. But what we did here is so that people have factual data from the district, we put the number of cases that we had up at the very top, student breakdown, staff breakdown. And then Jason, if you'll scroll down, you'll see that we also put recovery, how many we've had in total, how many were still there, but there's a red icon or just a red active. So if a school was inundated with, they had 12 kids out, but really we only had one active student, the rest were quarantined, we would put on there, okay, there's an active case at Ridgecrest. And there is today, we still have one that's active, but of all our other sites, those are the total numbers that was at our school that were COVID. And then down below, we had a quarantine update. And we also we still have it. We just put out the when you're fully vaccinated guidelines, so that this was very helpful in communicating to our families what it would look like for our district. And so this page has been very helpful in daily communication for our community and for the parents that had children, because nobody cares about what's happening somewhere else. They care about what's going on with their student at their school. Okay, we can go back to the slides. And so that's really what we wanted to do with our thinking outside of the box. Next slide. And as I prepare to wrap up, this is one of our favorite quotes, and mine especially, is be a positive force in a negative society. There is so much with social media that can bring down a school district if you don't put out the truth, your story. And so we wanted to make sure that in our daily communication, not only with our staff, but with our parents and our community partners, that they could hear it from us first. And that was built on the foundation and relationships that we had prior to the pandemic. So it's really important that you continue those professional meetings, those, relationship building. And I know most of you are doing that. And I hope that this presentation helped. If you have any questions, then there's my point of contact information, and I would love to talk to you. But I know you're going to hear some great stuff from Alesha. So I will turn it back over to Michelann.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. That was great. I know people gained a lot of information there, and they're going to gain information from Alesha too in just a minute. But I want to remind everyone to please be putting your questions in the chat so that the conversation can continue once our guest speakers have made their official presentations. And with that, I'm going to turn to our next speaker. Alesha Leemaster serves as Executive Director of Communications and Community Relations at Norman Public Schools. She joined the district in 2015, where she is responsible for strategic communications and community relations. She's an accredited member of the Public Relations Society of America, and Alesha serves on the Board of Visitors for the University of Oklahoma's Gaylord College of Journalism and Mass Communication. Alesha holds a bachelor's degree in journalism and public relations and a master's degree in business administration. And with that, welcome, Alesha. Thank you for being here. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Lynn too. Her presentation was fantastic. And I'll try not to repeat any of her tips. She certainly laid a lot of good groundwork for what I'm going to talk about today. Michelann asked me to talk more about just crisis communications in general. So I'll start by just reiterating how important it is to have those relationships in advance. I know Lawton did a lot of planning. Norman does the same thing. Tabletop exercises, those types of things. It's really important to get to know your local law enforcement, have a really good relationship with your internal emergency management coordinator or team. I know we just hired somebody recently from the Norman Police Department who is already doing a great job in our district. And so we have these conversations all the time internally about how to be prepared. Sadly, if you work in a school district, which I think most of the people on this call probably do, you know how often crisis situations occur, and they're not all lockouts or lockdowns. It might be an angry parent, that causes you to have to stop everything you're doing and respond. So we really deal with a large spectrum of crisis communications or crisis situations that require an immediate response. As many of you know, there's nobody more passionate about kids than their parents. So we try to be very timely and accurate and really handle communications with care, putting students first every time. So with that, we'll get started. Before we change to the next slide though, I also know there are probably some communication professionals on this call, and you guys could probably teach this in your sleep. So I hope that this information is helpful for people who don't have a communications department. Maybe you're the superintendent who drives a bus and teaches, coaches the baseball team and teaches science, and you're doing it all. I can't even imagine your situation, but hopefully I'll give you some tips that will help you. So next slide, Jason. So that initial media call, we're just going to start there because a lot of times that might be your very first indication that something's going on, especially if you haven't heard yet. A lot of times you might know that something's kind of brewing that may initiate a media call. But when you get that call from Channel 4 or your local newspaper, you can be taken aback just answering the phone or seeing that number on your caller ID. So my advice to you is to just really take your time. They have a deadline and you need to be very respectful of that, but you're in control. So take the call or listen to the voicemail if you don't answer, and really do your research, think about it, and then be prepared to call back. They will understand if you can't answer them right away, depending on the nature of the crisis. Certainly, if there's a building on fire or an active shooting situation, you're going to move a lot more quickly than you would if you've got an investigation happening for maybe something that's a little slower moving. So if you're not prepared to respond, but they're pressing you, and that happens a lot, they just try to get any nugget they can because they're on a timeline and they've got you on the phone. These are some things you can say that they're not going to argue with. Is that I understand you need timely and accurate information, and to do that, let me gather some facts for you and follow up with you, in whatever time frame. If you're not the person who can help them, and say it's a law enforcement situation, you need to defer, at least initially, you could say, I can help you best by putting you in contact with, and give them the appropriate person. And then if you really just don't have your act together right away, because you're still, when those things happen, things are moving so quickly, you've got a lot of meetings happening, phone calls are coming in, you're gathering as much information as you can. I'm sure I'm describing like a day in the life of a superintendent, really, any given Tuesday, probably. You just take the time to say, let me look into this further and get back to you. That doesn't mean you're saying you don't know or that you're not willing to help, but just that you're giving yourself the time to collect your thoughts, collect the information, and make sure you really communicate with the people who need to be communicated before you communicate with the media. So with that, next slide, please. Okay, so really starting with thinking about all of your audiences, that's critical. Lynn did a great job of talking about that as well. Really, your students, families, employees should come first. So if you get that media call, you really need to take the time to make sure that you have covered your bases with those really important stakeholders, that they don't get important information on the news before they hear from you. As a mother, I'd be really upset if I found out that something was happening at my child's school and I didn't even have a notification in my email or by phone or text. So make sure you cover those bases first and prepare your front line. They really are the people who are taking those calls, they're taking the heat. And if you have the opportunity to give them some of the information and they'll stay true to the accurate information, then that's great. But I think anytime, like today even, you could just send out some of those helpful phrases that really gives them the ammunition to be able to be helpful to the caller, parent, media, whomever may be calling, but just gives them the words. So that phrase, I can help you best by, is really helpful. I know we use it here all the time because they really don't know and they want to help. Those frontline secretaries, receptionists, that's what they're passionate about doing, is helping the caller. So giving them those words, I think, really allays their fears when something goes wrong, that they can really lean on those. When you are responding, this goes without saying, but do not speculate, only give the facts at the time. It's really, really tempting to speculate. I'll give you an example. I just thought of this just now because I don't know if you can hear this, but it just started pouring down rain here in Norman. I think that's what I'm hearing anyway. We had a substation. I don't know if I'd call it an explosion, but something happened that knocked power out of multiple schools a few years ago. We assumed it was caused by a storm, but we didn't know for sure. So, ultimately it wasn't. There was something, and it was a utility issue. But you don't want to assume. You don't want to speculate, because that can backfire on whatever situation it is, even the small details. So just really stick to what you know is true, which really bleeds into don't make statements about responsibility right away, because you just don't know. And it's really important to really focus on sharing the information that's appropriate to share at the right time. So when the district has taken a misstep, if there's an employee who's done something that's opposite to what your policy says they should do, or something that that the stakeholder believes the district did wrong, at the appropriate time, you should own up and say, you know, this is what we're doing to make sure this doesn't happen again. You absolutely need to take ownership when it's appropriate, but just be careful in those immediate moments when you don't know all the information, because it can get messy down the road if you say things that turn out not to be true. And on that note, when there are mistruths or facts that, or things that are stated in the media that aren't facts, that can even be a certain word that's used, and the reporter certainly doesn't intend to do it on purpose, but certain phrases can mislead the reader. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and say, hey, I just want to make sure this is clarified. Really want to make sure that your readers or viewers get the right information. So it'd really be helpful if you could make sure that this phrase is corrected so that people don't get the wrong information. So don't be afraid to ask for those corrections respectfully when necessary. Okay, next slide. When it's time to provide a response and you're ready, I always take a minute to write down what my objective is. You know, the reporter has the story, but it's your information to share. So what is it that your objective is? What do you really want your stakeholders to know, and the readers and you know, the community at large or even beyond? What's important for them to know? Write it down. What do you really want to come out of the interview? And then really think about how to respond. You know, a TV news crew is gonna want you to go on camera. A lot of times it's important to go on camera, but sometimes you may elect to make a different decision to share that information because maybe that's the best way to get the accurate information out. So really think through the pros and cons, build your message first. What I like to do is I take a sheet of paper, and on the left side, I write down every question I think I'm going to get, especially the ones I don't want, right? Everybody's got questions. They're like, oh, I really hope they don't ask me that. So, but they will, you know, and you've got to be prepared. So write down every question you can anticipate. And in that center column, just write down a very succinct answer. Is the answer to that question yes, no, you don't know? It would be inappropriate for us to discuss that right now because there's an ongoing investigation, or whatever the case may be, because you want to answer the question. It's really important to not be evasive, particularly when those questions are very important and the answers are very important to your stakeholders. So write down a succinct answer, and in the right-hand column, write down what you really want them to know about that. So that you answer the question, but then you can also share what's important for the reader. So before you decide on how to provide a response, again, I say this all the time, has everybody been communicated with? I'll give you two quick examples of why this is very important. One example, we in the past have had deaths in our community connected to our district, you know, employees or students. Unfortunately, that happens. And when we're asked to confirm that did they work for us, or are they a student in our district? I mean, I just put my foot down every time. And until I know that the next of kin has been identified by the authorities or the appropriate parties, or we have permission from the family or whatever, it's so important, even if it's out, even if it could be all over Facebook. But once the district confirms it, you don't want to jump out ahead of those conversations. And so that's just disrespectful to families. And so we really hold back even when it's hard in those cases. Another example, I don't know if anybody on the call would remember, but in Norman, we had a school bus full of 5th grade girls. This is really hard for me to talk about, but on their way to SeaWorld, and they had a rollover accident. And I was actually at an OU football game. It was a Saturday, and get the call. We're scrambling, trying to find each other and get to places where we've got reception and we can get the facts. And then Channel 4 just calls me right away. I'm thinking, this happened in Texas. How is this so soon? It's like 4 minutes later, and they had a connection. I think a family member connection is how they knew so quickly. And so, they're going to push out a notification that says a school bus was in an accident. You can't control that. Of course, they need to get that information out quickly. But we held a statement for far longer than the media wanted us to, because it was so important that every family connected with that accident had a personal notification about what had happened and that there had been an accident, because that's the last thing you want to see, like I mentioned earlier. So that's really important. And I think everybody probably knows that, but I just always reiterate that, because in the heat of the moment, you can forget because you're just moving so quickly. If you're deciding how to respond, think about, can you stay calm regardless of the situation, regardless of the question? If you think you're going to get flustered or stumble on your words, you owe it to your stakeholders to make sure the information you provide is accurate, and that you don't want it to get misconstrued inadvertently because you might stumble or say it incorrectly. So I always say accuracy is number one. So if you're comfortable speaking to it, and certainly you need to be as accessible as you can, but just keep in mind that accuracy is always the most important. But it's also important that depending on the crisis and the stage of crisis that people see your leaders. And so think about how best to do that and be accessible to the people who need to see you. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please. Speaking about getting flustered when you don't know the answer, that or you get a question that you did not anticipate, that happens a lot of times. You think you've thought of it all, and they bring up a question, you're just like, oh, I didn't think about that. Or a connection maybe you didn't know about. There's information out there that you hadn't uncovered yet, but somebody else has. It's okay not to know. It's okay to say you don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is, and then reiterate what you can share. I really like to let them know that you understand it's an important question and you want to make sure you provide them with accurate and timely information, and that you'll follow up and give them a reasonable timeline. Ask them when their deadline is and let them know you'll contact them before then. If you do know the answer, but you're not in a position to provide it, maybe you don't know if you can provide it, in schools or healthcare, or it is a lot of, probably everybody on this call knows, we deal with FERPA, HIPAA, all of these restrictions for releasing information. And sometimes in the moment, you might not know if it's okay. Is it okay if I say that student is on an athletic team? Is it okay that I release this, personnel matters, student discipline, those kinds of things. If you need to collect your thoughts and really understand what you can say, I always like to say you're not in a position to provide it right now, but you're happy to follow up with more information when you can. And then you can just do your due diligence and make sure you're not saying things that you really are not permitted by law to say. That's always really helpful. And a media parent, anybody can surely respect that. Next slide, please. The specific situation that Michelann asked me to cover was the recent Norman High basketball crisis. I'll say it's a crisis when you drop everything, right, and have to deal with it. So I think most everyone has heard about this, but in case you didn't, it was right before spring break, actually the Friday before, happened on a Thursday night, but we were alerted Friday. I was alerted Friday morning, by the way, by way of just getting the audio and not knowing what I was listening to. And I was mortified, not mortified, disgusted. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In that moment, I knew this is a national story. In just a few short hours, we're going to be all over the news. This crisis is a little bit different though, because our students were really the victim for the most part. And so for those of you that don't know, our Norman High girls basketball team kneeled during the national anthem in the state basketball tournament. And the commentator or the broadcaster who was contracted through the OSSAA thought the mic was off and made racist comments. Of course, he was very offended by their kneeling and said some very, very disgusting and hateful things about these kids. So in that, just to kind of take what you know from communications and apply it to the scenario, you've got to act quickly, but you really need to think before you respond. And that's hard when, I mean, we were getting, all the parents were livid, as you can imagine, and they're wanting us to respond right away. We actually put out a statement before we got any media calls. But we really had to think about what's the story here, because there's really two things happening. You've got kneeling, which is a very controversial thing, and then you've got the racist comments. The racist comments is the story. I mean, the kneeling has been happening across the nation for years now, and you know, our students do not leave their rights at the door, and we empower them to exercise their rights. Really, that's their choice. But we also know that there are very, very passionate thoughts about it on both sides, and it's not really our position to get in the middle of that. But you really have to think about what's the story, and the story was the racist comments. And so that's what we were addressing. Like, don't talk to our kids that way, right? I mean, you get all mama bear, right, on your students. And so focus first on protecting the students and the families. Those girls, they had 2 more games to play, and you know, the miracle story, this could be a Disney movie now, right, is that they won the state championship. But they had to focus on that, and they were getting bombarded with media calls and requests, and we just shielded them from that to the extent that we could. And we said, look, you're welcome to participate in these, but we will take this for you. And then after this is said and done, you know, at that point, you'd be in a better position. And it's really important too to think about what do their parents want. And so we really protected them. You know, when you've got we had Lester Holt, ESPN, Good Morning America, the whole 9 yards calling, and we just took it. And then it's important to state only the facts, like we've all said before. In our initial statement, we named the broadcasting company because that was a fact. We did not name the individual. We heard who the individual might be, but that's not our place to name them, even though a lot of people wanted us to. And it's a good thing, because the first name we heard turns out was not the person who actually voiced the comments. And now there's lawsuits because that person is suing some media outlets right now because it was misreporting, apparently, allegedly. So we make sure you stick with the facts, otherwise you could find yourself in a really messy spot. And then protecting the innocent. You know, we talked about the students and families, but a lot of times you have community partners that it's really important that you think through all the pieces of the communication. In our community here in Norman, we are blessed with a broadcasting partner, Sports Talk Media, KREF Radio. They're right here in Norman. They're just a really great partner. They live stream for us all the time. They sponsor events for us. They're in our offices offering to help with things all the time. They're just a really great partner. They weren't the ones who did it. And we knew right when this went out, so many people would assume that it was one of their employees. So we made, just from the outset, after we, you know, once we gathered our facts and took our time to make sure, you know, I called them, making sure they weren't the ones. They weren't broadcasting, because for state tournaments, they weren't permitted to at the time because of contracts or something. I don't know, that gets outside of my scope, but we went on to say in our statement that it was not them, and that we will only rely on them moving forward. And I think that was really helpful to our partnership, and really prevented them from being on the defense for something that they didn't do. So it's really important to sit down, take deep breaths, try to just push out the distractions right away, and think through those messages before you respond so that you can ensure that you're covering all of your bases and making sure that your response doesn't alienate any of your stakeholders, because it can get really easy, especially in this day and age with, I mean, name a topic, right? COVID, there are polarizing views on so many of the things that we deal with, that it's really important to just think through all of those before you choose your words. So with that, I am finished.
Great. Thank you, Alesha. I appreciate that. And thank you again, Lynn. We're going to open it up to questions in the chat. Have a few to start out with. First of all, I'll throw this one at you, Lynn. You talked a little bit about where you are in the organization there at Lawton Public Schools, and I applaud your district for recognizing the need to have communications at the executive level. So talk to districts that might not be enjoying that at this moment. Do you have any ideas, any recommendations on how they get leadership's attention when it comes to the placement of communications and how essential it is?
Well, we've been through 3 superintendents in the last 3 years. One transitioned out to a new position, and then we had an interim, and then we had our new one. The one that we had 3 years ago knew what it meant to have a communications person. Our interim, it was important for me to sit down, same with our incoming, to sit down with them and share what it was that we expected. Like, here are the expectations of what our families and stakeholders are looking for in our district. What are your expectations for me? How do you expect us to communicate? What is it that you're looking for? And truly have a conversation about, if a situation happens, do you expect to see yourself out there in that role? 1, managing the district and daily operations, and 2, handling the crisis, but then 3, all of the incoming requests for information. Are you the one that wants to do that, or do you want somebody to assist? And so it was important to bring them along with us so that they could see what happened every day, and to include them and report back to them. But I think really where we got a lot of support was bringing them along during the exercises, having them a part of the training, having that daily discussion of, here's what we're dealing with right now. What is your recommendation? And here's where it helped us, is that they said, well, you're the subject matter expert. This is your area. What is your recommendation? And I think it's important that, the communications person in the district, or whoever they decide as the representative, is in those executive meetings. Because when the superintendent is communicating his expectations, the communication person should push that out so that it's known across the district. And for us, it was truly walking with them and sharing what we were doing and bringing them into our training. I think that's really what got our superintendents, because of the amount of hours that had to go into preparation planning. The Lawton First that we did was truly on our district. We started that, we initiated that with our community partners. And I had a great support system in Steve Gluck out at Fort Sill, who we had done prior exercises with for 5 years. So I absolutely love him and appreciate all his help. But our district carried that weight for the Lawton First exercise. And when we had them start helping, they were like, I don't think we can manage the district and all the daily operations. We really need you to run with it. So that's where that support and that trust and bringing along your communications person came into what it is. And truly, I love our superintendent and our leadership, because they respect what it is that we do in this department and all the important things that come with it. Because you need that communication, to help with your public. And I didn't say it on my presentation, but social media, you love it, but you can also be your worst enemy if you can't squash those rumors and address it immediately and just calm people down. A lot of it is, fear factor. And so that happens without a communication person. It's really hard just to find all of that information and, like Alesha said, what's the root cause of all of this, and then address that.
Very well, thank you. And then I have a question for you, Alesha. You talked about the incident happening, the incident regarding the basketball team happening actually, on a Saturday, maybe it coming to a head. inevitably these crises and all that disasters don't book their times 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, do they? So tell us about more what you learned with that, is, you know, being able to have you and your team jump from you know, 2 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, for example. I don't want to jinx anybody, but Alesha, what else did you learn from that that you could share with us on Go Kids, Go Teams, things like that?
Sure, yes. And actually, I think crisis situations prefer to occur when you're not at work. It seems like that's really what happens more often. I think a really great example would be the bus crash, because of it being on a Saturday and being during an OU football game. And I know several of us were there. One thing that in like the follow-up debrief, basically postmortem, if you will, that we learned was we basically do have a system. We kind of have it down to a science in terms of who contacts who's responsible for the certain information, who has what role. We really have that down. But what we learned is we could have gotten together in person, and we didn't right away. We were operating by phone. One of our really critical members, we assumed was not in Norman at the time, and he was, but we didn't know, you know. So at postmortem, we thought, you know, just come together, because one thing that I will say that I learned from that is, and this is a mistake that I'm owning up to. When that bus crashed, we heard that they were sending meta flights to the students, and there were teachers on the bus as well, to be meta flighted. And of course, that's, you know, a very serious thing. And then I got the information, oh, they did not meta flight anybody. It's they're just taking them to hospitals by ambulance, just to precautionary measure, just to be checked out. And so in that moment, I assumed wrongly that, okay, everybody's fine. This was however many hundreds of miles away. It was a beautiful sunny day in Norman. And I thought, oh gosh, that's so great. What I didn't know, and what another team member could have shared with me had we been communicating in person, but everything was fast moving, and we were all calling each other and conferencing in certain people, and you know how that goes, was that it was raining heavily, and they could not metaflight the students, and they were still several were in very critical condition. So my initial statement from the district really didn't reflect the true nature of the emergency. And in hindsight, you know, and PR people sometimes get the unfortunately, they say we spin, or we try to minimize. I really try not to do that. I try to be very transparent. And in that moment, I didn't know. And so it's really important to make sure you're asking all the questions that especially when you're not at work and it's a weekend or it's a holiday or whatever, that you do what you need to do to make sure that the information flow is still very solid, so that you can respond the way you need to.
Very good. Yes, thank you. And then Lynn, going back to you, any advice specifically for, I know Lawton is not quite a rural district, but yeah, Lawton is in southwestern part of the state. Do you have any additional advice to districts that, you know, might need to identify someone who, short of having a communications department?
Sure. And I saw this come up in the question, and I'll kind of give a shout out to you, Michelann, because when we were doing that Lawton First exercise, you provided the PIO training. And so for people that are looking to better themselves or don't have that person, for us, it's, you know, we have 3 smaller districts in this area that are pre-K through 5th, and they don't have a communications person. Their superintendent is their PIO. but their superintendent also knows that they can reach out to us and we'll support them and we'll help them with resources. And we can, I mean, during COVID, that was one thing that I did just automatically. As we wrote our statements and we wrote what was going out for plans, I would shoot them an email saying, hey, I don't know if you want to use this. I don't know if you need access to it, but I wanted to share it out so you can use it. Feel free to tweak it so that it fits your school district. And I know they were appreciative. So for those that don't have a PIO, reach out to neighboring school districts and, reach out to those who, your resources. There's tons of resources here. There, several of us are on here in school district, and even your local organizations like your hospital, they have a PIO person there. They have, we have our networks, and I know we talked about this before, but, OKSPRA and NSPRA, those public relations entities, but OSSBA, they also have their resources there. But there's a lot of things to help school districts that don't have a communications department, and truly finding that one person that, can be the point of contact for a school district is important. I think that's really where we should, they could start first, is identifying who that would be.
So we threw out some abbreviations there, some acronyms. I know Oklahoma School Public Relations Association is OKSPRA. OSSBA, you talking about the School Board Association?
Yes.
Okay. And the other one, I didn't catch the other one. I'm sorry.
Oh, and then the national for the communications, people in the school district, they do have the National Public Relations Association too, and they kind of tie together, and they're great resources.
Perfect. And you're going to have Lynn's and Alesha's in a few minutes, my contact information. If you need more information about any of those groups, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I will give a plug for our office. If anyone needs certain training when it comes to public information or crisis communications, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our office can provide that. And then I want to ask one more question of Alesha real quick. Sorry, Alesha, you're not getting off that fast. You mentioned your crisis communication situations, and I know from my experience, you're just getting pelted and pummeled with questions and information. And so one of my questions for you, I think can help everyone, is how do you wade through all that information? Figure out what's legit, what's real. You talked about your chart. I love that. But you're monitoring social media, you're monitoring traditional airwaves. Tell us what worked for you.
All of it. Yeah, it comes to you fast and furious, and rumors. Definitely, I think in your opening video, that was a really good point, that rumors can get out of control. So it's really important, I think, as you're anticipating those questions, that you're taking into account, okay, what are the parents saying when they call? I mean, if it's something that's happening and you're getting a bunch of inputs, like what questions are they asking? What are you hearing? Think about what might be interpreted, or is there something that's happened recently that they might try to connect it to that has nothing to do with the situation? And just really, really wading through all of those rumors and all of those facts and putting them in that in the questions. And a lot of times we'll even put out an FAQ just to dispel some of those rumors, depending on what it is. Like speaking to COVID specifically, and Lynn did a fantastic job covering what her district did. There was a lot of that, a lot of rumors, and we had so many FAQs. I think people wouldn't even read them. There was just so much information. You can still see it out there. Our website /COVID, it's all there. But you really just have to have all hands on deck. And okay, what is everybody hearing? And it's a mess. Some of the things that we've done to prepare moving forward is we take all of that and we put together a timeline. We did this for the bus accident. We've done this for COVID, and a couple of other scenarios or situations that we've lived through. And we just write out what went well and what went wrong. And that kind of helps you as you're kind of filtering through that information to be prepared for it moving forward.
Very well. Perfect. Well, thank you again, Lynn and Alesha, for presenting today. And thank you everyone for being on today's webinar. I wanted to bring a couple things to your attention. First of all, you should have everyone's contact information of the speakers as well as myself. Again, if you need PIO training, I know we can find that for you. Additionally, we'd ask your input after this webinar here today. A survey will be emailed to you regarding today's webinar, and we'd appreciate your thoughts regarding the training event. And after you submit your survey, a professional development certificate will come your way. So there you go. Additionally, we have been recording today's webinar. It will be posted on our website. Look for that in a couple of days. And then finally, I'm going to take the opportunity to give a little bit of a preview for next month's webinar. We do these the third Thursday of every month, all from the Office of School Safety and Security. And next month, the topic is going to be cybersecurity and schools. So we'd love it if you plan now to join us on May 20th at 1:30 for cybersecurity, what school officials need to know to keep their districts safe. So more information will be coming in the weekly administrators newsletter. And with that, thank you again for being on today's webinar. Have a great day. Stay safe.